You know, I remember specifically hearing like, you know, this is a big deal. Like if we're kind of putting a lot on this right now, if you F this up, it's over. I found fighting games, I think for the first time in a 7-Eleven. You're grabbing a slushie or something like that and you're slamming it against an arcade machine, trying to get electricity to come out with Blanca. It was Street Fighter 2. It was on a corner stop somewhere, and yeah, 7-Elevens were effectively the hot spot for the introduction of fighting games for a lot of people in that time. I think fighting games are special to me, and they've always been since a really young age because of expression. I think identifying with a character, you know, finding similarities of things that you enjoy, that the character enjoys, or cool moves that they have that just synergize with the way that you feel is something super special. And when you get a fighting game that allows you to express that, like through your personality, it feels, where you make a one-to-one connection with that character, I think it's one of the most fun and enjoyable things in the entire video game medium. I've had a lot of fighting games over the years that have had some pretty profound influence on me. I got a lot of special ones. I never really dedicated to a single genre, although I'm kind of a big Capcom guy. Believe it or not, my fifth spot would absolutely go to Killer Instinct 1994. It was one of the greatest looking video games of all time when it came out. It was the first fighting game that I really dedicated myself to. I just wanted to be the best I possibly could at it. Granted, I was like 11 years old, but I got introduced to a fighting game community because of it. There was a rec room in my local community and people just gathered and played Killer Instinct pretty much competitively for candy bars. This 20 to 30 people that we met up with like every single weekend to play KI became like the first FGC that I kind of knew about. And this is like 1995, dude, so the concept of it wasn't even really there yet. I think fighting game players gravitate towards themselves because we all find commonality in the things that we like with each other, but there are so many people that I remember and friends that I have today that we effectively got bound to because of fighting games. It's something unique about the genre where you make lifelong friends as a result of this stuff. And I don't know if it's because of the competitive nature, you know, trying to keep up with a rival, much less having something to sympathize with or some new cool thing everyone can get together about a fighting game, but I don't think I've ever had that happen in any other like video game medium in terms of the genre, RPGs or shooters or anything like that. It's unique to fighting games for me. My fourth most influential fighting game to me, I think probably goes to Marvel vs. Capcom 1. And while Killer Instinct was the game that introduced me to a local FGC, this was about the arcade experience. I did not know how to use an arcade stick, so in 1997 or 8 when Marvel vs. Capcom 1 came out, I liked the game so much and it looked so cool that I had to start learning how to play these games on stick. It was important. So that was a huge jump for me. And also just introducing yourself to a completely different community, the random arcade where you just don't know who the heck is there, who represents it, but you want to take them down, that was extremely predominant with Marvel 1 for me personally. The people that I met throughout that game, I don't know where they are now, even what their first names were, but we all sort of knew who each other was and just met up at that same time of week, at that same time, every single gathering. So Marvel 1's special because it's that fighting game that I really dedicated myself to arcade time with the scrounge of as many quarters as I can grab as like a 14-year-old. Arcade experiences for me were sort of like babysitting. My parents were super busy and they worked a lot. So we had to travel really far for them to go to work because we lived in kind of like the boondocks. So we eventually moved closer, but in that time from leading up to it, my mom would go to work and she would just drop me off at the mall. And I would get as much money as I possibly could doing chores and whatever throughout the whole week so that I can afford to play arcade games at the time. Luckily, if you're good at fighting games, you can make $5 last a really long time. You can make 50 cents also last a really long time. So that was one thing that I loved about fighting games, is that you can stay on the machine for an absurd amount of time, like an hour, and only spend like a couple of quarters. That's where a lot of my time went. In terms of the area that I grew up in, SoCal and Southern California arcades, the thing that I learned about the arcade going experience was that you're gonna run into every walk of life, right? It's the equivalent of like walking down the Santa Monica Pier on like a busy Saturday. You're just gonna see literally every walk of life down there. And I think it's obviously not unique to Southern California, but the cool part about arcades is that it taught me to find commonality with anybody. You know, it didn't really matter either where you grew up or what side of town it was or whatnot. At this point, like, I knew who all these people were just because, oh, that's the guy that plays Mega Man and Wolverine. And that's kind of how like you looked at everybody. You looked at everybody through this specific lens of each fighting game that we play. I think that's the perspective that gave me kind of throughout the rest of my life in terms of growing a community and everything like that, is that there's this thing that we all hold together, and it's, you know, the love for this genre and the love for each one of these games. My third game kind of is almost chronological because it's Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. Third Strike's obviously one of the most beloved fighting games of all time, but when it came out, it was kind of a unique game. It was difficult. It was promoted as being like the hardest fighting game there is. Obviously big moments, Evo Moment 37 would elevate it and bring it into a mainstream. But when I was getting good at that game, I feel like a lot of my perspective was from this point of like a Dark Souls kind of perspective. We wouldn't say that back then, but Third Strike was effectively the Dark Souls of fighting games. It was so difficult, but what you could pull off if you were focused enough, if you were professional enough, was incredibly cool. Evo Moment 37 was like the cementing moment of that. And that also elevated me to like, oh, I'm going in. I'm putting as much time as I possibly can into this. I think it's still the fighting game of all fighting games I have put the most time into. In terms of like globe-trotting and going to as many arcades as possible, because now I'm officially like a bit older. This is the early 2000s. I have a vehicle. I made my way to a lot of different places to find competition. And that's where that focus was, where it's just, oh, I want the person that's the best. I need to get them, I need to see what they're doing, I need them to beat me so I can beat them. Going from arcade to arcade, it taught me what I actually enjoy about this. And it wasn't even unique to specifically fighting games, it was the other games. I really enjoyed putting on a show. I liked it when like you would go into an arcade and see some guy dual wielding in like House of the Dead, and you're like, how is he even keeping focus and flipping and dipping? I thought that was just so incredibly cool. And when you do something neat in fighting games, it was so impressive to see somebody just go on a crazy win streak. And everyone's like talking about this person or wondering what they're doing or analyzing their strategy and stepping up to try to beat them. I think that's where the most appeal was. To the point where even money, like nowadays, obviously, prize winnings is a big thing, but to me, it was just, I just want to stay on the machine. I would join tournaments just to get people to like watch your gameplay. That's what my focus was. That actually extended to like Dance Dance Revolution with the first version of DDR. It's just like, this is getting so many eyes. I want to play this, you know? I start to think back and you realize that how much that influenced me. I actually enjoyed that more than competing. And now it's literally my job. To just show off people the coolest stuff in fighting games and hopefully get them to find something that they love just as much. My second most influential fighting game is technically the one that launched my quote-unquote career. There's been other fighting games that I've had an opportunity to work on, but this one as a cementing value in terms of me being a content creator. Before the term content creator or influencer or anything like that even existed, there was just a couple of dumb 20-year-olds with some cameras and some costumes filming Assist Me. Because we all love Marvel vs. Capcom 3 leading into Ultimate Marvel 3. That game is hugely influential. That's like a professional career sort of thing, not even mentioning how enjoyable of a game it is, how it's like now one of the most celebrated fighting games of all time, for very good reason. But that game sort of like tied me to the path that I'm on right now. And the projects that we worked on, eventually we got hired from Capcom within like 6 months of doing it to make a lot of episodes really fast. It taught me a lot of how the industry works, how marketing works, how this entire thing functions, all the cogs that go on the inside. So Ultimate Marvel 3 holds a special place in my heart. And whenever there's a spot to like support the community or like elevate the people that are doing incredible things with it, that stuff is always like incredibly valuable, that those communities are still here, they're still doing stuff. And you know, I just love the game so much, I just want to see it played all the time. When we first started moving over from doing Assist Me as like just friends, having fun, people are watching, cool, nobody's making any money. We get hired where it's suddenly, oh, okay, well, we have to make something that is actually official and represents the game we're making. I learned a lot in that process. There was also very little cross-pollination between fighting game community and official companies like Capcom or Namco or anybody like that. And I remember getting some pretty harsh criticism from the inside because they wanted to stay separate. You know, FGC does its own thing, we do our own thing over here. And, you know, I remember specifically hearing like, you know, don't F this up. This is a big deal. Like if we're kind of putting a lot on this right now, if you F this up, it's over. So we had no idea what we were doing, but at that point I knew we had like a responsibility to make this cool. We had to make this be something that was worth it and worthwhile. And it taught me a lot from that point forward of just the relationship between developers and consumers and like the line that gets crossed every once in a while when they go too far. And that was an invaluable experience and still carries over to this day, especially the relationship between like the developers, publishers, and also the fighting game players that are buying the game. My #1 most influential fighting game is absolutely Killer Instinct 2013. I think it's the first official fighting game like I worked on. Granted, we did promotional marketing videos for Assist Me and Marvel vs. Capcom 3, but this one was like a deep involvement where it was from early time of the game before it was even out, developers asking like opinions and getting play tests, and I'm able to pitch ideas of things that can happen between trailers and story mode cutscenes, and oh, now I'm just fully a game dev. KI's that game. It also helps that it's like one of the most engaging fighting games of all time, with some of the best music of all time, with some of the most fun characters of all time. There's a lot of really great things in there. Best netcode, possibly. All those things kind of came together to create this like beautiful creation. It's a game, as someone that was on the inside, made by people that love this stuff, that always made other things throughout a lot of their development career, but finally had the opportunity to jump in at this. And between folks at Double Helix, Microsoft, and Iron Galaxy, they took the reins and they just ran with it. And it was so cool to be on the inside, to see things develop, to see stumbles that get fixed and adjusted, to things that go too far to be reined back, like every aspect of development. It's such a special game to me. And I feel like the KI community knows it, because the KI community still shows up. They're still around. They still love playing this thing. There's still a ton of people playing on Xbox Live still to this day. I think KI is in a special spot for me personally. It's a game that I'll truly always champion, because I think it's honestly like the perfect fighting game.